This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. So we have 10 years of drama, and this weekend, Sara Vine writes this excellent piece that I want to go through with you to point out a few things so you can understand how they are reframing this narrative with this trip down memory lane. After 6 years of studying this whole saga, I think many of us can understand now that these so-called quote-unquote journalists, aka propagandists for the royal family, will not put out anything unless it is sanctioned and blessed by the institution. So even though these journalists may come across as being highly critical, know that they would not put this stuff out there unless they had the blessing of the palace. So let's go through this article because I want you to see for yourself how these narratives start morphing. But before we get started, if you could help the kid out, please hit that like button and double check to make sure that you're subscribed. We all know how YouTube likes to play a whole bunch of games with this channel. Just a heads up, for those that have already read this article and don't feel like sitting and listening through it, go ahead and fast forward this video to minute number 21 to where I explain what's going on here. Other than that, sit back and enjoy. Headline: Meghan and Harry, a decade of drama. It's 10 years since the start of a love story that sprinkled Hollywood stardust on the Windsor family, then led to the hammer blow of Megxit. Sara Vine charts a royal romance that plays like a real-life version of The Crown, and, after last month's olive branch, asks, "What's next?" The article begins. When Soho House in Istanbul opened its doors in April 2015, an old friend of mine was thrilled to be invited to the celebrations. It was a glamorous weekend-long affair attended by celebrities such as Eddie Romane, Jamie Dornan, Sophie Ellis-Bextor, Claudia Wickleman, Paloma Faith, and more. There were lavish lunches and boat trips, and many of the invitees stayed in the new hotel, a beautifully restored palazzo. My friend recalls that at one point he was in the lobby when a very pretty American woman strode up to the front desk. She proceeded to berate the staff about some kind of problem in her room. My friend couldn't quite catch the details, but the general gist seemed to be that she was unhappy with the quality of her goodie bag, which she felt was insufficiently lavish in its largesse. My friend remembers thinking, "Wow, it takes quite some chutzpah to complain about a free gift at a free weekend in a 5-star hotel full of A-listers." At the time, he had no idea who the angry American was, nor, he recalls, did anyone else in his group. A year later, he saw a photograph of Prince Harry's new girlfriend, Meghan Markle, and recognized her immediately, the woman from Soho House, Istanbul. I've never forgotten that anecdote because it always seemed to me that, given the way things turned out, it was pretty telling. In fact, in many ways, it reflects Meghan's attitude to the royal family as a whole. She was treated with generosity and kindness, offered all the trappings and the status, but somehow none of it was ever quite enough. So she stamped her pretty little foot and flounced off back to America with Harry in tow before complaining vociferously and viciously to anyone and everyone, Oprah Winfrey, etc., about how ghastly the whole thing had been. Rather, like the staff at the front desk at Soho House, the royals didn't quite know what had hit them. A decade on from the Suits star's emergence onto the scene, almost everything has changed for the British royal family. It would be a stretch to suggest that Meghan, who turned 45 on Tuesday, has been solely responsible for the seismic changes that have affected the institution. But her arrival has nevertheless coincided with a series of unpredicted and deeply unfortunate events that have brought the House of Windsor from a place of relative stability to one of chaos and uncertainty. To be fair, the rumblings began a whole year before she was even on Harry's radar. In 2015, when in court filings connected to a defamation lawsuit involving Ghislaine Maxwell, Virginia Giuffre alleged that she had been forced to have sex with Prince Andrew. In the summer of the following year, 2016, Harry began dating the glamorous Meghan. Unlike Harry's previous, rather jolly hockey sticks girlfriends, Meghan was sophisticated and Hollywood slick with her own profile and a successful career. She was an instant hit, widely thought to be a breath of fresh air and someone who might sprinkle a bit of stardust on the crown. It was badly needed. At the time, the then Duchess of Cambridge was not quite as self-assured as she is these days, and in any case, she was busy having babies. Princess Charlotte was born in 2015, Prince Louis in 2018. Always impeccably turned out, Kate was nevertheless quite county, whereas Meghan seemed distinctly more urbane, more Sex and the City than Horse and Hound. Even though Meghan is a few months older than Kate, she somehow seemed more fun, more edgy, a flirty divorcee. She was briefly married to American film producer Trevor Engelson. They divorced in 2014, with a sassy outlook. Then, shortly after it was announced that Harry and Meghan were dating, the hit Netflix series The Crown burst onto our screens. The cultural impact of this show cannot be underestimated. It effectively turned the British royal family into a global soap opera, and the boundary between real life and TV fantasy became blurred. Viewers, particularly in America, struggled to tell the difference between fact and dramatic license. Invented dialogue and speculative storylines were interpreted as historically accurate. The overblown and often rather crude drama of The Crown, scripted to titillate audiences, it made its makers stupendously rich, began to spill out into real life. In May 2018, Harry and Meghan tied the knot against a backdrop of family turmoil. Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, a former lighting director living in Mexico, posed for an ill-advised paparazzi-style photo shoot, including being measured for a morning suit. Shortly afterwards, following a frenzied response to his actions, he suffered a heart attack and later underwent an operation to insert several coronary stents. As he was unable to travel, Kensington Palace announced 2 days before the wedding on May 19th that he would not be attending. Meghan issued a statement that felt strangely icy. "Sadly, my father will not be attending our wedding. I have always cared for my father and hope he can be given the space he needs to focus on his health." In the absence of Meghan's father, Prince Charles offered to walk her down the aisle. It was a lovely moment, with her mother, Doria, looking on. It really felt as though this young woman from a troubled family had found a warm welcome in Harry's. Everything seemed set for success. She and Harry and the Prince and Princess of Wales were dubbed the Fab Four, but it wasn't long before cracks began to show. There were rumors of a row between Kate and Meghan over Charlotte's bridesmaid's dress, which supposedly left everyone in tears. Meanwhile, journalists began to hear less than flattering stories about the new Duchess. There were tales of high-handed behavior. Staff turnover was unusually rapid in the Sussex household. Accusations of bullying began to circulate. Whatever the truth of it all, in June 2019, the two couples officially parted ways, with Harry and Meghan withdrawing from the Royal Foundation. In October, ITV aired Harry and Meghan, An African Journey, a documentary following the couple on tour with their baby son Archie. It now became clear that something was very wrong. Harry's animosity towards William was palpable in his conversations with ITV's Tom Bradby, in which he described him and his brother as being on different paths. But the real bombshell dropped when Bradby asked Meghan, "Are you okay?" To which she tearfully replied, "Thank you for asking, because not many people have asked if I'm okay." It was obvious she wasn't. After that, things seemed to go downhill very quickly. In November, Prince Andrew gave his catastrophic Newsnight interview and, in the immediate aftermath, stepped down from public duties. For the late Queen, then in her final years, the strain must have been immense. It might have been incumbent on the younger royals to pull together in a show of solidarity, but the opposite happened. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex dialed up the drama in January 2020 when, having just returned from a 6-week holiday, they announced their withdrawal from royal duties. Their final appearance as working royals at the Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey that March was marked by clear tensions, especially between the princes and their respective wives. By the end of the month, Meghan and Harry were gone. At this stage, there was still a fair bit of sympathy for the Sussexes, and for Meghan especially. The Duchess wasn't the first royal spouse to struggle with the trappings of that life, with all the expectations and scrutiny it brings. Her situation brought many in mind of the woman who, had she not died in tragic circumstances, would have been her mother-in-law. Echoes of Princess Diana's struggles with the press and the so-called firm were undeniable, and Meghan's supporters painted her as a victim of an amorphous and malevolent establishment determined to punish her for being different from the royal norm. I don't think that was ever the case. The royals are sticklers for protocol and not overtly given to demonstrate gestures. The world they inhabit is governed by strict etiquette and well-worn traditions. For a young actress used to the effervescent atmosphere of showbiz circles, it might have been easy to mistake reserve for indifference or even hostility. For all her mistakes, I don't think Meghan deliberately set out to be a disruptor, and I don't think it's fair to hold her solely responsible for the shambles that followed. It's easy to always blame the woman, but the truth is Harry was as much a part of Megxit as she was. About a year before Harry and Meghan's wedding, I attended a launch at the palace of a film commissioned by the princes to honor the 20th anniversary of their mother's death in 1997. William was eloquent and charming, patient with the assembled press and photographers. Harry was not. He seemed short-tempered and distracted, as if the whole thing was just a massive annoyance. But when talking about his mother, he became a different person. Gentle, thoughtful, and terribly sad, really quite vulnerable. I remember thinking, this poor boy has never got over losing his mother. It was clear, both from the documentary itself and from Harry's demeanor, that he harbored a deep resentment towards his father. The truth is, Megxit was never just about Meghan and her struggles to adapt to royal life. It was just as much about Harry's trauma finally coming to a head after all those years. He wanted out as much as she did, and she was his escape route. For Harry, Meghan represented freedom from his father and his stepmother, whom he blamed for his mother's unhappiness and from the obligations of his birth. Even before he married Meghan, he was searching, whether consciously or unconsciously, for a way to escape his generational curse and construct a narrative of his own. Unlike his elder brother, who married a woman deeply respectful of the institution and mindful of the duties involved, he didn't need to worry about the succession. So Harry chose someone for whom none of it had any significance, who viewed it as just another role, and a faintly absurd one at that. In the Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan, which aired in 2022, Meghan inadvertently let slip her true feelings. Chatting on a sofa next to Harry, she recounted how, on meeting the Queen, she was surprised that Harry expected her to curtsy. Initially, she thought he was joking, but when she realized he was serious, she compared it to an American medieval dinner theater. "Americans will understand this," she said. "We have medieval times, dinner and tournament." It was like that. I curtsied as though I was like. She spread her arms wide, bowed theatrically, and said in a hammy voice, "Pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty." It was clear to her it was just some quaint old-fashioned pageantry. In the context of a family that takes its role extremely seriously, you can see how this kind of attitude might have grated. To many Brits, such casual mockery of the institution to which the late Queen dedicated her entire life smacked of arrogance. Sitting next to her on the sofa, even Harry seemed a little taken aback. But let's rewind to their initial departure in early 2020 and that freedom flight they desperately craved. Had Meghan and Harry remained true to their word and quietly slipped away to start a new life free from all the pressures of royalty, public support would have remained strong. But it quickly became clear that the couple had no such intentions, starting with that explosive Oprah Winfrey interview in March of 2021. With Meghan pregnant with little Betty at the time, the whole thing was obviously a setup to garner sympathy, to explain why they felt they had no choice but to leave, why it was a question of survival. Back home, Prince Philip was gravely ill in his final weeks of life, yet none of that seemed to concern the Sussexes. One by one, Meghan dropped her truth bombs. She accused the royals of racism, claiming there had been concerns and conversations about the color of Archie's skin. She said he had been denied the title of prince and implied that it might be a result of the former. She said she had been denied professional help for her mental health because it would be bad for the institution. She said that the Princess of Wales had made her cry, but that the palace preferred the narrative that it had been the other way round because they prioritized protecting Kate's reputation over hers. When asked by Winfrey if she was silent or silenced, she replied the latter. The late Queen nevertheless delivered one of the classiest responses in the whole of history, acknowledging the seriousness of the accusations while pointing out that some recollections may vary. A month later, Prince Philip was dead. Harry attended the funeral alone. If Harry felt some sympathy for his grandmother, it did not stop him from doubling down on his mission. After airing their woes together in the aforementioned Netflix documentary, Harry went solo with his memoir, Spare, in which he variously discussed his genitals, his sex life, his school days, and characterized Queen Camilla as a dangerous villain while moaning about the palace's relationship with the British press. The book was published in January 2023, a few months after the death of Elizabeth II the previous September. Mercifully, she was spared the humiliation of her grandson's embittered ramblings. But it was a serious miscalculation on Harry's part. The country was bereft, grieving the one person who had been a constant for so long and who had spent her life in its service. And here was Harry dragging his family through the mud. In February 2024, less than a year after his coronation, the king was diagnosed with cancer. The Princess of Wales' diagnosis followed a few weeks later. In Montecito, California, meanwhile, the mansion they now call home, Meghan was busy making jam and planning her next gig for Netflix. And ultimately, this is where it has all gone wrong for Harry and Meghan. For two people who claim to be so in tune with their feelings and those of others, time and again, they have demonstrated a complete lack of emotional intelligence, combined with a weapons-grade sense of entitlement. They are so wrapped up in their own drama, so insulated in their bubble of privilege, they fail to realize how thoroughly charmed their existence is, and that is a most unattractive trait. At a time when the royal family needed Harry most, he not only slammed the door in their face, but he also tried to burn the place down on the way out. No one is suggesting he doesn't have a right to be hurt, but weaponizing your pain as he has done only perpetuates the cycle of sadness. Had he perhaps fallen in love with someone who understood this, as the Princess of Wales seems to with Prince William, he might have found a way to heal and move on. But, as far as I can see, Meghan, with her own complicated family background and seeming desire for fame and fortune, was never going to be that person. Ultimately, it appeared she thought she'd have a starring role in a real-life version of The Crown. Yet, 10 years on, she is forced to slip in and out of Britain incognito with her two children, as she did last month, although she revealed to her 4.7 million Instagram followers that after a family holiday in Portugal, she, Harry, and their children stayed with his uncle, Earl Spencer, at Althorpe, sharing a picture of them walking through the grounds at Princess Diana's childhood home. Whatever the next steps, Harry doesn't have long to lock in a concrete plan. While the king is doing well with his treatment, he is nevertheless of an age. A King William might not be quite so well disposed towards his younger brother as his father, who, it is reported, has offered Harry a room at Buckingham Palace when he returns to the UK next month. One thing is certain, Meghan is not one to allow herself to be shortchanged. If someone displeases her, they sure know about it. I was once told, this time by a friend with contacts in the royal household, that one day the Duchess was interviewing for staff. A young girl, a perfectly harmless and nervous Sloane in her early 20s, was ushered into her presence. Meghan was sitting at her desk reading some papers. For what seemed like an eternity, she kept her eyes down, ignoring the girl completely. Then she glanced up, examined her, then went back to her work. "You can leave," she said. And that was that. One for Harry to ponder, perhaps as he considers his future within the royal family. There's a good reason why I wanted to read this out loud to you, so you could pick up on how much has been omitted from this disaster these past 10 years. What we have here is classic narrative reframing that reduces the scam of Megxit and the subsequent unraveling to a tidy story of personal incompatibility, ego, and Meghan might not be a right fit for the institution. At the same time, holding Harry accountable, but in a way that everybody is excusing his behavior because he lost his mother. We are watching mainstream pieces of this type almost daily now, and we're seeing that they're leaning hard on they overreached, Hollywood has cooled and is sick of them, the firm was too rigid. It was always going to fail because of Meghan's temperament and her ambition, and blah, 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 right? I've been pointing this out for a while with these articles and showing you how they're systematically stripping out the political, activist, and information control dimensions that were central to how the couple positioned themselves after 2020. The result that we see now is a softer, less radioactive failure story that treats them as just another celebrity flameout rather than covert operators who aligned with specific power networks and then lost the ability to dominate and control the information environment. So the deliberate omissions we are seeing in propaganda piece after propaganda pieces are not accidental oversights. They are the load-bearing walls of the preferred narrative now that the palace is framing. Harry and Meghan's political advocacy and proximity to heavy Democratic figures, as well as the Aspen Institute-linked work on mis and disinformation. Look at all the real stuff that actually define what they were really doing stays completely off, as if it never happened. No more mention of the political advocacy and how close they got to big Democrat players. No mention of Harry's work with the Aspen Institute crowd on mis and disinformation. Harry's constant public campaigns and whining against online harm and free speech, but at the same time running his own campaign, attacking people online who shared their own opinions about the disinformation that these two assholes were putting out there. No mention of Archwell and Archwell grants, including that documented $250,000 that went straight to Ashley Biden's women's nonprofit. Oh, and let's not forget the way they inserted themselves into every man-made crisis, coincidentally, where billions in U.S. taxpayer money was being recklessly thrown at for their virtue signaling points and advice. The whole media weaponization playbook with the Oprah interview, Netflix series, Spotify deals, along in partnership with all of the tabloids, carefully timing the controlled release of the narrative that they were pushing out at the time. No talk about the messy family estrangements on Meghan's side and all of those ongoing public questions about the kids' legitimacy and whether the succession line actually checks out. None of that. None of that makes it into these stories and likely never will make it into these stories unless the royal family's back is up against the wall to where they have to deal with it. Similar to like what happened with Prince Andrew and the release of the Epstein files last year. What this scam is reduced to is this psychogelized soap opera. Meghan was too Hollywood, too ambitious, and American. Harry was too damaged and resentful, and the institution was too stuffy. Ego and selfishness is what did them in. This is the narrative that they're pushing. Across the board, everybody is buying into it. And it's quite convenient. It avoids any serious examination of the diplomatic and partisan entanglements that would force harder questions about why a British prince and his stupid wife became useful idiots in certain U.S. radical leftist and Marxist institutional circles around the 2020 cycle and its aftermath. When we look at post-Megxit, this couple's highest value currency was narrative control and moral authority on so-called truth and justice against racism, mental health, and institutional critique. That currency was the most liquid inside networks that were simultaneously pushing aggressive content moderation regimes, framing dissent as disinformation, and treating the 2020 election outcome, as well as COVID and January 6th, as existential stakes, meaning, we can't have anybody contest that the election was stolen or that vaccines had side effects and that January 6th was a setup. When the online platform shifted, most dramatically after Elon Musk buying Twitter, the ability to suppress, deplatform, or drown out critics eroded as we saw how Congress exposed the collusion between social media companies and the U.S. government, as well as the radical advocacy groups like CCDH, bullying and carrying out pressure campaigns to get social media companies to take down content and ban voices. The same ecosystem that had amplified Meghan's truth, otherwise known as lies, and muted many of the flags being raised, such as Meghan's poor treatment of her alleged family, the grant choices that Archewell made, the overreach, as well as the inconsistencies and contradicting stories, they all lost leverage. The landmark Missouri versus Biden litigation, as well as other lawsuits that have followed, and the broader exposure of the government NGO platform coordination that made, quote unquote, we must control the information space for the greater good posture far more difficult because it did violate the First Amendment. This is why we see this hard pivot of Harry being a champion of online safety and protecting the kids. The way that I see it, the whole framing now of Meghan wasn't institutionally compatible, as well as her narcissistic ego contributed to this downfall, I think is the cleanest way to quietly bring Harry back without reopening the couple's deliberate subversion and involvement to undermine America. When you go back and you look at the beginning, all of these red flags about Meghan Markle were there. Everybody saw that she was a basic bitch. Everybody saw that her stories didn't add up. Many of us who followed this from the very beginning knew that this woman was not going to be a fit for the institution. There were so many red flags that we all saw in the very beginning, yet we couldn't talk about it. Because if you did, you got suspended, you got deplatformed, you got harassed, you got silenced, you lost your accounts. Back then, so much data was being scrubbed from the internet about this woman. Many of us were saying, wow, Meghan must be spending a fortune in having people clean up her image and, removing things that she doesn't want the royal family to know about. But in hindsight, the only people that would be able to do this kind of scrub would be the palace itself or some type of government entity. No PR firm would be able to scrub completely off the internet Meghan's origins. Seriously. The only people that could do it would be an institution or intelligence agency of some sort, which I'm guessing MI6 helped clean up this bitch's past. You'd be incredibly stupid to think that the queen didn't know what was going on and who this woman was, whoever the fuck she is. The palace, the royals, the journalists, they all lied. And now they're trying to figure out how they're going to soften this up to make the public accept and welcome this fool back into the mix, when I don't believe for 1 second that he ever left. And of course, these are all my opinions based on all the data that is out there to come to this conclusion, which I have shared with all of you. And my conclusion of all of this is also based on my own experience of being a target of these campaigns that Harry and Meghan had been running back in 2021 and 2022. 2022, when all of us who just were sharing opinions didn't know that we were subjects of this psychological operation that Harry and Meghan were conducting. Why? Whether it be to study how we were reacting or what we were doing to make their case for these laws, I don't know. But they were running these psychological operations and essentially carrying out this information warfare on unsuspecting innocent people like myself. So, whatever anybody says about, oh, Harry and Meghan don't have any influence, know that I have personal experience with this. And I'm here to tell you that this is exactly what went down, yet nobody wants to talk about it. What we're seeing here is Meghan and Harry being painted into these two losers. Yes, that is correct. They both are losers, but it's the easiest route out of this as opposed to diplomatic fallout. Now we're seeing all of these headlines coming out of Harry and Meghan considering apologizing to the royal family. Now the question is, why now? Of course, they've built this narrative around how Harry and Meghan have failed here in America, that they're going to return with their tail between their legs, essentially neutralizing this whole situation, forgetting about all that they were doing otherwise and continue to keep doing, but now on the down low. You notice that, like, Harry and Meghan are very involved with these online age verification laws that are being passed from state to state. And I told everybody that once they were exposed for censoring Americans, they were now going to start at the state level and go state by state. And here's what's been going on. I'm not wrong here. And don't be surprised or be shocked when Christmas rolls around and all of a sudden we hear these whisperings about how Harry and William now had to come face to face. I really do hope that in this instance, I am wrong about this, because there's still a little bit of hope left in me that William didn't know about this and that this feud that he has with his brother is real. I'm really praying that that's the case, and I really hope to be proven wrong. Anyway, that's just my opinion, and thought I would share this with you because it's becoming more obvious in what they're trying to do here. They want people to forget about the political activism and involvement with dodgy and shady figures here in the United States that had been subverting this country. So, I am bringing this to light because I don't think people recognize that this does work over the course of time. People end up forgetting, and new people that are learning about this whole saga will not see this history of what they were doing because they're making a concerted effort to make sure people forget about it. So all of the media articles that are coming out, they're going to suppress all of Harry and Meghan's activity in the United States during the Biden regime. And we can't let that happen. What did we all go through this pain and suffering for? I'm sorry, I want to see accountability, and I'm not going to shut up until we get it. And that's that. But what do you guys think? Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.